All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're exploring a deeply fascinating and honestly highly abstract cosmological framework proposed by independent researcher Gautam Pal. It's called the binary solar matrix. Now, I want to be super clear right up front. We are looking at a theoretical model here. This is not your standard absolute scientific consensus. But you know what? That's exactly what makes exploring these papers so exciting. It literally forces us to stretch our imaginations and question our most basic everyday assumptions about reality. Okay, let's dive into this. To start things off, I want you to try a quick thought experiment with me. I want you to genuinely challenge your basic everyday perception. Imagine you're walking into a completely empty, pitch black room. You know the kind where you literally can't see your hand in front of your face? What exactly is that darkness you're standing in? Well, if you're like most people, you hear those words and you immediately nod along. It's an absolute void, right? The simple absence of light. That is the common, everyday assumption we all share. We basically think of darkness as a vacant state, kind of like an empty container just sitting there, waiting for someone to flip a switch and fill it up with light. But Gautam Pal's paper comes in and challenges that fundamental assumption with this exact phrase. He argues that darkness is actually a highly ordered state of chromatic nullification. Just let that sink in for a second, because that completely flips our everyday assumption upside down. We spend our whole lives thinking we need to turn on a light to fill a room, but this framework implies the room is actually already full. According to this model, darkness isn't an empty void at all. It's a highly ordered state. It is, paradoxically, completely packed. Okay, so how on earth can something be completely dark yet full? To grasp that, we need to look at the micro-level physics of light, specifically the mechanics of chromatic nullification. Pal uses his really great analogy here. He compares the propagation of solar radiance to aquatic wave vectors. Picture overlapping water ripples when you skip stones across a pond. Or, if you're like me, when you clumsily chuck a big rock into a lake. Light travels in very similar wavefronts, with elevated peaks, which we call crests, and depressed valleys, which we call troughs. Now, imagine what happens when those ripples perfectly collide. Here's how the physics actually play out. Step 1, an advancing crest of a primary light wave aligns perfectly with the opposing trough of a secondary wave. Step 2, they literally crash into each other, and structural phase cancellation occurs. Boom. And step 3, what emerges from that exact point of localized intersection is a chromatic void, absolute blackness. So the crucial point is, the light hasn't actually vanished into thin air. If we look at the definition of a chromatic void, the underlying chromatic subcomponents, the colors themselves, structurally coexist right there at that intersection, but their spatial vectors mutually nullify each other's functional manifestation. What does that actually mean in plain English? It means the colors are still physically there. They are just trapped in a state of manifest non-existence. It's this incredible, massive optical illusion of nothingness, all created by light waves perfectly canceling each other out. Now that we have a grip on how darkness functions on our microscopic level, Pal scales this concept all the way up to the macrocosms. He introduces something called the axiom of universal polarity. This axiom states that the structural framework of cosmic creation strictly demands equilibrium. Basically, every manifested positive entity in our space-time fabric absolutely requires a deterministic, corresponding negative counterpart. You literally cannot have one without the other. They're locked in this necessary, ongoing existential tension. And this brilliantly illustrates how that axiom applies to our very own solar system. Think about our positive sun. That's the observable, high-frequency scalar source that drives our physical universe and gives us our daily cycles. But to maintain cosmic balance, Pal proposes it demands an inverse counterpart, the negative sun. This would be an unmanifested stellar entity that governs an entirely independent, negative dimensional reality. Think about that for a second. The theory is essentially proposing a massive, invisible ghost star constantly balancing out our own solar system. Let's mentally map this out to clearly see the balance between these overlapping realities. On one side of the coin, we have the manifest universe, our observable spacetime, governed by the positive sun and characterized by visible, active light. On the flip side, constantly maintaining the equilibrium is the proposed anti-universe or negative universe. It's totally unmanifested, hidden from our view, governed by the negative sun, and structurally defined by total chromatic absorption. We can't see it, right? But mathematically, under this specific framework, it absolutely has to exist to balance the cosmic scales. Which brings us to a really fascinating question. What exactly is the internal composition of this darkness? Well, we know how standard empirical models view the visible spectrum of our positive sun. They see it as a synthesized composite of active wavelengths.
Specifically, visible light is composed of 7 fundamental colors, the septenary scale. Just think of a rainbow, right? But what is truly mind-bending about Pal's model is that darkness itself is structurally composed of the exact same 7 fundamental colors. The number 7 is the absolute key to both the light and the dark spectrum.
So if both light and darkness are made of the exact same 7 colors, what's the actual difference? It's entirely about their internal kinetic state. Active resonance, which we see as light, features high-frequency wave vectors projecting outward for us to empirically observe. On the other hand, passive resonance, which we perceive as darkness, has those identical septenary wave configurations structurally intact within the medium, but they are functionally unmanifested. They are entirely latent, just totally hidden from view. Let's move to Wanja and see how this builds into the ultimate paradigm shift in Paul's theoretical framework. If darkness is basically just latent light, and if the anti-universe is the negative counterpart to our own, how exactly do these two deeply intertwined realms interact with one another? This profound mystery leads us directly to the concept of cosmological genesis from the black hole matrix. To wrap our heads around this, we have to completely redefine black holes. We typically hold this standard astrophysical view that they are permanent cosmic trash cans, right? Just terminal boundaries consuming everything, even light, and absolutely nothing ever escapes. But under Paulus's framework, a black hole's singularity is not merely a gravitational sink. It is a reciprocal cosmic dynamic. It is, incredibly enough, the primary engine of genesis itself. Let's break down the incredible mechanics of how a black hole in the anti-universe actually acts as a cosmic womb. First, there's absolute compression in the negative domain, as it draws in matter and those passive color frequencies we talked about. Second, that immense gravitational pressure triggers a massive phase inversion. And third, it violently erupts outward into our positive domain as active resonant light. It literally takes in the passive dark configurations, flips them inside out, and bursts entirely new cosmic reality right into our universe. Which brings us to the really profound resolution of this whole explainer. According to Pal's framework, darkness is the primordial progenitor of light. Darkness is absolutely not a vacant terminus. It's not a dead end. And it is definitely not simply the absence of something else. It is the fundamental, fertile substrate that engineered our entire observable universe. It's a theory that completely transforms the night sky. It changes it from a void of nothingness into this invisible architecture that is just teeming with hidden potential. It really invites us to look up at the universe in a completely different way. So I'll leave you with this provocative question to ponder. If primordial darkness is truly the womb of reality, what else is waiting to be born from the unseen corners of our cosmos?